Here we go. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Erica. How are you doing?
Hey, Sven. I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, pretty good. Pretty good. It's a sunny day. We still have the corona pandemic, at least here in Germany, but we're doing good, right?
Yeah. I see you got a haircut.
Yeah, exactly. The haircuts actually are open since Monday here in Germany. And how is it with you? Do you have appointments already, or?
I'm fine. I've gotten used to doing my hair on my own. It's a lovely box color.
Doing a good job, I must say.
Thank you. Thank
So
you.
next session, I would say, next labs talk, I would like to see a different color then, okay? Can we swap the color every time?
Not for a few years, but
Some pressure.
I don't know. I might treat you guys to some of my looks over the years. I've had some crazy colors, but yeah. And let's get into our topic for today.
Absolutely. And the topic is retail experiences virtualized. So we thought about combining two topics, more or less, that we somehow believe are somehow related to the pandemic and also really super current and up to date. So on the one hand side, we thought about talking about somehow enhancing your product detail pages with 3D models, for example, to kind of provide a better experience for the shoppers. And on the other side, we thought it might make a lot of sense to actually combine that with body measurements. So when you're actually buying, let's say, the T-shirt in size XYZ, you're actually getting that T-shirt, and you know basically that this was the correct size to order. And that's why we have April from Presize, and we have Yehiel from Hexa. Should we let them in?
Yes, please. I'm very excited to get to talk
Welcome,
to
April.
two SAP IO startups today.
Hi.
And welcome, Yehiel. Great to see you. How are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Well, at the office, as you can see, so pretty well, not complaining.
Well, I mean, what's amazing about you, Yehiel, is that in the background you see people walking around. So you're in Tel Aviv, if I remember correctly, right? And I think like 60-70% of the population got vaccinated, right? So.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. I don't think Israel is so, I'd say, famous about its orderly fashion. We typically take the opposite sides. But somehow they got it done, and it's amazing to start to get back to normal and.
April, I think you're based out of Munich, right?
Yep, I'm in Munich. I'm in my lovely home office.
Yes, so we roughly know your situation, which is the same as ours, right? So Erica is in Nuremberg. I'm a bit closer to Munich. So yeah, we're still waiting for the haircuts here. So right, guys. So should we start with a little intro? And maybe April, could you maybe go first and just intro yourself a little bit to our audience, maybe?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to do that. First, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. And I'm a user experience researcher at Presize. So my main focus at Presize is in investigating the user experience of our sizing solution and getting feedback from users on a bunch of their issues. So how much effort is required, how easy our solution is to use, but also kind of more personal issues or topics like the struggle behind trying to find clothing that really fits and their level of comfort in providing personal data in order to get that perfect fit.
Mm-hmm. Could you maybe quickly talk about how Presize works exactly? I mean, I know it, Erica knows it too, and Yehiel probably, but so what's Presize so our audience knows it?
Yeah, so Presize is a web-based sizing solution. So essentially what you can do is on online clothing shops that we partner with, there is a link to us. And you can either use your desktop, starting out on your desktop, but ultimately you use your smartphone and you take a short 7-second video of yourself rotating around your own axis. And from this video, we can extract super accurate body measurements. And we use those body measurements and compare them to product data in order to recommend you a size that will fit you perfectly.
Very cool. Over to you, Yehiel.
I've been building companies since I was 21. Hexa is my third company and second startup. And for the past 5 years building Hexa, I work with Fortune 500 retailers and their equivalents around the globe, helping them extract value out of their synthetic data. So mainly 3D.
So you mentioned 3D, and so that means what's the key thing that Hexa provides to customers?
Super simple. So we solve two main problems. The first one is the content creation problem. So Hexa converts 2D images into a 3D asset. We typically do it at half the cost and twice the speed. We use a machine learning workflow that helps us optimize the manual ones that are currently exist in the market. And the second problem that we're solving is content distribution. Simply, there isn't any unified file format for 3D assets. So it's very, very hard for a company, a brand like, let's say, Logitech, to distribute their content globally. It's not like a JPEG. That 3D asset lives inside a 3D viewer, and moving it from one place to the other is expensive and slow.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if it came out clearly when I mentioned it just before the intros, but both Hexa and Presize are SAPIO startup alumni. So Hexa was a part of the Tel Aviv program. I believe it was 1 year ago, 2 years ago. How long?
Yeah, almost a year now.
Almost a year. And Presize was also a part of the Foundry in Munich. So yeah, it's really great to get to talk to two startups on this really important and pretty interesting topic. I actually would want to kind of go into Yehiel, you talked a little bit about the challenges that you're hearing from your customers. I wanted to ask you guys, what are the greatest challenges that your customers are coming to your companies and trying to solve with your solutions? Yehiel, I guess you could continue. Sorry, I realize it's hard to coordinate when there's more than one interviewee. I'm still getting used to it.
Should I start?
So I think that going back a year ago. So it's now actually a year since we went to our homes and this weird pandemic came upon us. And I think that the first phase was kind of how do I deal with this with this pandemic? How do I deal with this distance? First phase was, how do I, now that everything is online, how do I even make sure that the products gets to our customers? But now we're getting into a phase where the infrastructure is laid, and they need to sell more. They need to bridge the gap, the visual gap between products and shoppers, which was one. Once it was very, very, very understandable how it's going to happen. You go to the store 90% of the time, 85% of the time, and then you purchase something, and now that link is broken. So mainly around that area. So how do you use augmented reality to get products closer? I think that it's very similar to, let's say, what April will present is, how do I put a garment on top of my body? So putting a sofa inside someone's room is, the same thing, just with a home, with a room. So.
Yeah. And yeah, please, April, I would love to hear a bit more, because it's interesting. You have the very clear customer problem that I think literally everyone can relate to. But what is it on your customer side? Like, what are they most wanting to help solve with Presize?
So like you said, we really have kind of two customer groups. So we have clothing shops who are now facing this challenge of increasing online sales, which is then, of course, coupled with an increasing return rate for clothing items that don't fit. And what we see, at least in Germany, is about half of clothing items that are purchased online are returned, and half of those are due to poor fit. So for online shops, for clothing shops, this is definitely an issue. And then, of course, we have the online shoppers who are now, for multiple reasons, perhaps purchasing clothes more often online and aren't always sure about the sizing or the fit of those clothes, which could lead them to either return items or even purchase multiple items in different sizes in order to find out what fits and then return those extra ones. So this is, of course, effortful. It takes time. You have to take these things back to the post office to return them. So for online shoppers, it's an issue. And then this creates a real issue for the shops and how they handle all of these returns as well.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. So, Yehiel, I've got a question for you specifically now. So I'm really wondering what are your customers typically asking for? What's like the number one thing? Do they by now just want to have 3D models that so kind of slightly enrich your product pages instead of having images and videos? They now want to have a 3D model, or are they really looking for the full-fledged AR solution? Take that 3D model, put it somewhere in the room, or do they want to have both? So what's the number one request that you're getting?
So first of all, you cannot have AR without 3D. So 3D is the infrastructure. Yep. And when you're comparing it to when you're trying, you start with 3D, and then you can go outside to AR, but you can also do 2D images. You can also do 360s. You can augment 2D images. So let's say if I create a 3D ring, you can put it on 1,000 different models instead of just the ones that they are used to shoot. So it divides into two, right? So the ones that actually understands and have invested heavily in 3D, you have a lot of very large organizations, and they're all up to how do I optimize my current 3D creation workflows? They already understands the value, but they cannot scale. It's extremely hard to scale 3D content from any one physical location. Then you have the second group is, the ones that are, okay, this is interesting technology. I want to start testing it and see how can I reduce my cost of visualization. Maybe I can go 3D first instead of creating a physical asset. Mm-hmm. And what's the ROI? Okay, so how do I return the investment? How do I increase sales? How do I lower my customer acquisition costs? So all of those things you can do with 3D. It really depends where you're at in terms of adoption.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. And so do you see a lot of churn, I would say, when you step from 3D models to AR? Because, once you enter AR, you need a smartphone, right? So you're no longer basically rotating a 3D model on a screen, probably your desktop browser, but you need to kind of push the user to a different device very often, right? Or are all your customers already mobile first, basically?
Yeah. So everybody's mobile friendly first, however you want to call it. So you see over 60% of traffic, and you're seeing those numbers going up with purchases as well. It really depends. It really depends on the customer, how they crafted their strategy. But today, even if you're sitting in front of a computer, you can just scan a QR code. Apple's is native, so you just open up your camera and just one click. So you don't need to download it. The old days, it was you need to download an app, and then the app would have understand, space, so spatial computing. Now ARKit and ARCore, so Google and Apple is doing it so intuitively. You just one click, and then you place that object inside your environment. So it's extremely easy.
Very cool. Now, April, I've got also one more specific question for you, and that's in the research that we did, and we also tried out your solution, right? And it's pretty amazing. But isn't like knowing the size of someone's body just one side of the house, basically? Once I know it's the size 38, for example, who tells me that the trousers I'm shopping for are not kind of coming in a smaller size or something like that. So how do you respond to that basically with Presize?
Yeah. So it's definitely true that there's more to it than just the body measurements. So we usually say that the body measurements are just 1/3 of our equation. The product information is another third. So that's what we're comparing the body measurements to in order to generate a size recommendation. And as this product information is improving, for example, with 3D data, this comparison becomes much more meaningful. So we can get into more detail about fit and cut, etc. But the final third of that equation is subjective. So it's about how people and how individuals think about fit and about their fit preference. And this is, of course, very tricky. So how do you quantify fit, especially when people are self-reporting this? So we work a lot with visualizations as well as written descriptions to kind of try to explain at least what we mean by fit. And certain types of fits so that we can at least start to standardize feedback that we're getting from our own users in terms of clothing fit.
Very cool. And especially your solution, right? It really helps to lower the return rates, right? So I think you see like on the website, I saw like 30% or so, if I'm not completely wrong.
Yeah.
That's amazing, right? Because that's also pretty sustainable, I must say. So.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping to see that this is some sort of lasting impact on the return rates. If we can really convince people that this is the size that's going to fit them, you don't need to order that second size, then we could potentially reduce returns. Yeah.
Cool. So now I have, Yehiel, I have one more question for you, actually. I'm on my list here that I need to ask you. And that's really about data and analytics and how you're using that when it comes to 3D models. So I think you mentioned already that you might even start with a 3D model before actually producing the actual object. But could you also use let's say, the 3D analytics data to actually figure out which parts of a product are especially interesting, useful, for example, for the customers? And is this happening right now with your customers?
Yeah, so I think that the most exciting thing about that piece of data is that it's so flexible. So we spoke about generating additional sets of data, or visual data, out of that 3D asset, which is one part. But even that 3D asset, when a 3D asset gets screen time, each vertex, right? So these are the building blocks that are building that 3D asset.
Yeah.
When it gets a screen time, you can actually count the seconds and create a heat map. You can then correlate that back with something that went wrong. So if I'm a retailer or a brand and I want to understand why that shoe collection didn't work, all the data I have now is sales data. That's it. Yeah. Maybe for the most sophisticated retailers and brands, they have engagement data, but even that, it's like, even if I have engagement data on images, right, on a specific image that someone liked and then converted, it's very hard for me as a studio to replicate that success. With synthetic data, once you have that 3D asset, you can understand the angles of which you shot that image or a 3D asset, where people are looking, what's the interest point. You can synthesize additional visual data out of that, as an interest point, and check and monitor automatically, does it affect my engagement? Does it affect my revenue? Or add to cart rates or return rates. So because this is a very flexible data set, it's endless what you can do with it once the 3D asset has been generated or reconstructed. Okay.
Now I guess I can cut something out of our queue here, Erica, and that's visual synthetic data. Okay, so now I think I understood. Whoa,
yeah.
I've been paying attention.
I thought that was very interesting, and honestly, I wanted to kind of pose a twist on that for April, because one thing that I am fascinated by is essentially as a customer, you need to know what your measurements are, but they're also not going to be static, right? Especially in these times
right
when people, yes, we're being polite, but yes, I doubt that there are very many of us who are the same size we were a year ago. Is there any part of Presize that is continuously following up on the progression of changes per user, or getting any kind of insights from how those might change? And let's also look at a positive side. Maybe you've really been hitting the home gym, and and really made some improvements, right? Is this something that end users can somehow see reflected in their usage with Presize? And also, are there insights that that brands and stores are able to gain from the progression of these changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, right now we just use the most up-to-date measurements. So the last time that you either scanned yourselves or answered questions about your body. And we generally say that you don't need to do this again unless you think that your body has changed, or perhaps maybe every 3 months or so. And we are moving in a direction where we're planning to start thinking about allowing users to create accounts in order to start kind of tracking that information. So if they really wanted to start scanning themselves once a month and see, oh no, my thigh measurement went up or something like this. And it also has great applications for fitness as well. Like you said, if you really are trying to see changes in certain locations, either muscle mass or weight loss or something like that, there's definitely a use case there. And we're planning to go in that direction.
Oh, that's really cool. So yeah, my next question actually for both of you is, why do you think that we're only seeing more of these virtualizing solutions now? We touched upon this a little bit in our pre-chat, and it's not just the pandemic, the obvious reasons, but I'd really love to hear your thoughts on why you think the technology has been there. We've been moving in this path before a year ago, but suddenly we're seeing it explode. April, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have to admit I'm not an expert on this subject, but I think, of course, the pandemic had a huge influence here. But I also think that it's essentially a matter of that the technology is finally starting to catch up with these ideas that we have. So if you think about the movie Clueless, which was one of my favorite movies growing up, it came out in the 90s. The main character there has this virtual closet where she can kind of click through and look at all her outfits and decide what she wants to wear before picking one out. That was in the 90s, right? And I think it's just, it's taken a long time to get to the point where that's something that's actually feasible and usable for the everyday customer. And of course, high quality cameras in smartphones have definitely contributed to that, along with the technology that's just needed to model objects in 3D from photos and videos. But I think there's still quite some ways to go in this direction.
Yeah. And Yehiel, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think April is spot on. So when you have neural networks that weren't available or as strong as there are now, Facebook is doing an amazing job, and there are more companies that are using the power of neural networks to generate 3D assets from a single view, so a single image, and then kind of connecting all the images together. But I think that we look at value, right? So if you look at that 3D asset that we're creating, if you're talking about commerce, let's say 3D commerce, the amount of value that we're able to extract from each of those assets today is much higher than a year ago. You have the kits, right? So augmented reality, which is a very strong use case. You're now starting to do virtual try-ons. You're now exploring synthetic data. So how can I reduce my visualization costs, right? Marketing use cases. So the same 3D asset today can generate 5, 10, 20 times more value for the decision maker. add that, right, so to the psychology of a decision maker. So if I'm a director and I want to push a project, right, I only have 10 projects I can push in a year. Where do I put my effort and budget, right? What do I bet on? Will I do it for offline projects or online projects? So the amount of budgets that are now moving into the online space in general are much, much higher because the value is there. So we saw, instead of, we're talking about we'll be there in 5 years, it happened in a month. And, I saw the concerns. So they cannot get caught up again without being prepared for 100% online. And it has an impact on the amount of value that you can extract.
So I'm wondering, do you see that snapping back at some point? I mean, in Israel right now, you seem to be getting back to normal, right? So here in Europe, it's not exactly like that. Also probably not in the US and other places on Earth. But or do you see it as, to some degree, it's a one-time investment, and once you know how to do 3D and stuff like that, then you're gonna stay there, right? So
because the products are always replacing themselves, and a typical retailer will have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of products, not talking about the millions that the big guys have. It's an endless race. Right? It's not going to end anytime soon. The amount of products that are on that 20% top selling products, it's so big that there's no way even us as a company can scale that in the next, let's say, 12 months, right? It's a process. You cannot brute force this. This is a gradual process where you build the infrastructure to do something that was once manual, and now you want to scale it. So it's a gradual process, but we will see online going back to normal but higher than average levels in a year from now. But until that point, it's everybody understands what's the value now. Everybody understands where to put those budgets. So you'll see more and more of these experiences, especially when we expect to see more value extraction strategies like augmented reality or virtual try-on. Look at what Snap is doing. How much of their revenue is now virtual try-on with commerce, right? Very, very large segment of advertisers. And they need 3D assets to empower that revenue stream.
Yeah, very cool. So, hey, what I wanted to do next is a little bit of geekery, basically. Just need to let it out, basically. But so web versus native. I mean, a lot of your solutions kind of, they are working on the web, basically, but sometimes it's a bit slower, for example, when it comes to native applications. So how do you see it, basically, when it comes to 3D models, 3D viewing to AR? Do you think we're going totally web and we will be able to forget native quite soon?
Yeah, so it's already native. It's native on the device. You don't need to download AR Core. It's already in the operational system. You don't need to download anything when you're using Safari. Right? ARKit is embedded within the browser. So it's already embedded, and WebGL can run on any browser. WebGL is the infrastructure that renders 3D assets, and it's already, it's already there inside every browser that we're using. So it's already native.
But would you also say, like, let's say some years ago, right, people would download dedicated apps that would allow them to position a product here and there for this little company XYZ? That time's probably over, right? I mean, who would actually download an app to be able, let's say, to rotate a product, right? I mean,
so it's not even that. It's like it's moving from from marker based to markerless.
Yeah.
Instead of asking a user to print something, put on his hand to see a watch, neural networks can now identify that part and position the virtual watch on someone's hand, at 24 frames per second, if not more. So again, it's everything together, kind of coming into that one place still it's very difficult to create 3D assets, and we're trying to catch up, but it's still going to be a massive challenge when we're moving forward into 2021.
Okay, cool. So April, one more question for you, and that's so I've been trying out your solution, right? And it's amazing how it works, but I also have to kind of rotate myself in front of a camera, and I've just thought from a pure psychological point of view. I mean, at least I'm not doing this naked, right? This is awesome, right? But I mean, you still have to rotate and record yourself in front of a camera. So what do you do basically to make sure that people are not scared of doing that actually?
Yeah, this is a tough one. This is the critical question, right? Because it's such a personal decision. So some people have no problem doing this. Some people say they would absolutely never do it no matter what we tell them. And then there's the rest of people who are just a little bit unsure, a little bit uncomfortable. And this is where we can try to convince them that it really is secure. So no one is seeing your video. Your face automatically gets pixelated as the video is uploaded. Once our algorithm is extracting these body measurements, the video is then deleted forever. So that's what we have to get across. And the trade-off is that you get these super accurate body measurements, which are within 1.2 centimeters of reality. You get the accurate size recommendations that come along with this. And all of these can in turn save you time and money and help protect the environment. So these are kind of all things that we have to focus on communicating to our users to convince them that while it might be a little bit uncomfortable, they really don't have anything to worry about, and the trade-off is worth it.
Yeah, so it really comes down to communication and also getting used to it, I guess, right? So
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'm assuming that this is maybe one area in which you're able to apply your academic expertise. So I noticed that that you studied psychology, and I'm just wondering, how much of that are you applying when it comes to your work with Presize and your work with UX design, and if you could just give our users a little bit of how those two worlds come together.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for this question. I'm happy to answer it because I completed my PhD in the learning sciences, which was also in psychology last year. And as I was finishing up, I was really kind of struggling with what to do next. So I was pretty sure I didn't want to stay in academia, but I didn't know a lot of other options out there. But the field of UX and UX research in particular is a pretty good match for people who have this sort of academic research background or even just a background in psychology. So for me, particularly, the research skills were very critical, coming up with research questions, developing hypotheses, figuring out how to test those, and then actually conducting tests, analyzing results, and sharing those findings. I mean, those are all things that I had spent years learning how to do in academia. And so I had to just kind of translate those into this new environment. And of course, what you learn even in some basic psychology classes can start to help you know how you should be talking to people, how you need to frame questions so that you're not biasing people, how to really listen to what it is that their concerns are. So the biggest challenge for me coming out of academia was just getting accustomed to this much faster pace. And focusing more on business impact and this trade-off between wanting to design a perfect study and the study that you can actually conduct given the resources that you have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it because I'm a low-key psychology nerd, and so I really appreciate it, and I can relate to what you mentioned, and it's been amazing to me seeing how much these principles and these ways of thinking and interacting affect so many areas of business beyond the obvious, right? So I thank you for that. So I also had a follow-up question, which is a little bit left field. I actually had to kind of explain it a bit to Sven, but I'm very interested to hear your take on the uncanny valley phenomenon, and if that does affect your work and how so. So for our viewers who aren't very aware, the most basic way that I can describe this is that in the progression from when from when a rendition or a representation of something, in most cases that this applies to is like the human representation, like in robotics, for instance, as close the closer that it gets to being more realistic, people are comfortable with it and positive with it until it reaches a slight dip where it gets to be a bit odd and a bit unsettling, right? It's talked about in animation and in robotics, but I was also thinking that, especially in these two areas where people are really needing to deal with representations of what they're very used to in their normal lives, whether it's their living room or their office, and putting artificial items there, or it's of course maybe an avatar of their own bodies, that maybe this phenomena comes into play. So I would really like to know, if that's the case, and if so, what's been your experience with it? Yehiel, would you like to start perhaps?
I think a week ago or a couple of weeks ago, Unreal just released, what do you call it? The MetaHuman. It's insane. If you haven't looked it up, it's literally insane. You can create really lifelike figures in a click of a button. So we're getting to that place. I think that it's super important, that uncomfortable feeling when it's not just right. That's the uncanny valley. Without passing it, it's really difficult for us as humans to interact with those type of digital beings. So yes, super important. It's where everybody, even when we're creating a shoe or a desk, you want to pass that uncanny valley just with a desk, right? It's pretty much the same. It's easier because the materials and the behavior of that object in our minds is simpler. So it's simpler to mimic. But we're talking about specifically humans, which is what typically refers to uncanny valley. It's getting there. It's very close. And so shout out to the Unreal team that did it. It's amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, and you, April, like especially because I've seen that Presize is developing avatars. I saw one demo where I was really impressed how much the avatar resembled the figure, the user, using the app. I mean, is this something then that you have to deal with when how users are comfortable with how they're portrayed?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in our current version of the app, we're not quite there yet. So we do have a demo version of this, but we're not doing this for everyone yet. And it's definitely something that we're going to have to keep in mind as we move forward with 3D avatars, because if you start getting into detailed faces and facial expressions, this is where you really can run into some trouble there, especially if people then want to use these avatars for something. In digital experiences or for gaming or something like that, you have to be really careful that you're not just creeping people out because it's close, but there's something off,
It just really reminds me of Snapchat, right? When you create your actual emoji or something like that of yourself, your representation of yourself, it's totally comic style, right? It comes close to myself. Like I might be wearing short trousers in summer and this red T-shirt and stuff like that. Yes, I do, Erica. But it's not me, right? So it's in the end, it's a comic figure. So would you, with these avatars, go down the comic route basically, or would you try to make it as real as possible? I would assume the comic way, or?
Yeah, so I mean, that's definitely where we are now, and where we would go in the near future. I think this uncanny valley issue is a big problem across a lot of different areas. So I don't know if it's something that we will be able to solve, or if we want to even try. But for now, we're definitely going more towards the, I would say, cartoon style.
Yeah, very cool.
Just look at Tom Cruise on TikTok. He has deep talk Tom Cruise. You saw
Okay. Is it like a deep fake?
Very impressive. Very impressive. This is one way of getting a really significant shortcut into passing the uncanny valley, where you can cheat. So you take just a face, which is easy to break and take and build again on top of different people. So it's also, I think, an interesting path forward when you're thinking about the uncanny valley.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's something to discuss for the next Labs chat, actually, Erika, right? So I see lots of topics now. Thank you guys. The one thing we also wanted to discuss with you, so we mainly talked about your technologies, more or less, or your services that you're offering, because we have this pandemic and we want to enrich the product detail pages. You want to kind of make sure people are ordering the right thing, and we live in this digital environment where we're trying to make the best out of it, basically, right? But the other side of the house is that also this helps with sustainability, right? So when you, for example, see a 3D model and you're able to rotate whatever you're buying perfectly, then you have little surprises when you actually get the product, for example, right? And the same applies to body measurements. When you, of course, know your size and you know what you're ordering, basically, then you're unlikely to return it, which is good for the environment. So do you think this will have a lasting impact? So what's your point on that? So do you think we'll at some point, really snap back and maybe just return to normal life and all go to the cities and buy there, basically? Or do you think we'll have a lasting impact with making online shopping basically more sustainable? Let's maybe start with you, April. Sorry.
Sure. I think this was a direction that we were heading in already towards more online shopping, and it's just been accelerated by the current situation. So it would be great if we could have some sort of permanent impact on reducing returns for clothing bought online. So, for example, if this concept of free returns goes out of style, or that you only qualify for free returns if you somehow used a sizing solution in advance so that you make sure you get the best fit you could have gotten. And I think that at least awareness is being raised about the impact of all these excess returns and that they're having on the environment, and that there are solutions to this problem. Mm-hmm. So
I think that's a great point, actually, that you're just mentioning the free returns. And there might be some legislation coming, right, in some countries, for example, that returns are not allowed to be free anymore because it's just such a huge environmental problem, for example. In this case, this would be actually excellent for Presize, right? Because that would definitely boost your business even more, right? Yehiel, what do you think?
Well, for us, it's pretty simple. Once you start with 3D and you don't have the physical object, it's much easier to ideate it, right? So to build it from scratch. So you have virtual sampling if you're talking about fashion. Two very strong Israeli companies, Optitex and Brownsware, are leading that space. I think the third one that worth mentioning is Clo. So you're seeing more and more branded retailers starting with 3D. And it saves them cost, time, money, and the environment a lot of pollution. But even going back to synthetic data, instead of taking this huge crew to shoot someone, you can just synthesize it if you have the 3D asset. So you can just impose that 3D object on top of a 2D image. So the amount of I think pollution that is going to be saved using synthetic data, I don't think anyone has ever calculated it because it's so early, but it's very, very significant.
All right, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting take on it too, because it's not just simply returns, right? It's also how much gas are you using to drive out to your warehouse-sized stores on the edge of your town, right? It's how much effort do you have to go through if you're ordering furniture and then having to return it. It's a very precarious thing. So yeah, no, it's really, really great insights. Thank you both. So we're actually at the end of our session, and we have just one last thing to ask. And for both of you, that would be, what was the last thing that you've experienced in 3D, virtual, or augmented reality? And this, of course, does not have to be work-related, but it'd be really great to know, what is the last thing you experienced in AR, VR?
April.
Yehiel, do you?
Yeah.
So someone go
April.
first.
Okay, I'll go. So I'm based in Munich, and in Munich they are constructing a second main line for trains through the city. And the info center for that project has a 3D virtual experience of what the new main underground station is going to look like, which is pretty cool to kind of visualize that and be able to walk through the future main station of Munich.
Oh, that's awesome. Cool. Yeah. And you, Yehiel?
For me, I think that, I'm kind of thinking it's interesting. So, we help a lot of startups, access this 3D data because it's so expensive to create if you're not using machine learning. So it's either, that type of experiences, and you're seeing amazing startups and very talented people that are building a lot of experiences. But I think I'll go with the more personal one. So I was called to I have twins at the first grade, and they did kind of a show and tell what Daddy does. And all I needed to do, and this is again, I know the team and from Google that is doing such an amazing work. And they have those figures, those animals with animations. And when you put that tiger inside your room and let your kids play with it, the reactions are insane. It's so overwhelming. And there's so many animals. There's so many educational options that are now open using these type of technologies. And you see the kids, how, when we were a kid, it's like maybe you had a colored book you can open up and see a tiger. And they're placing a tiger inside their freaking room. Yep. So for me, that was the most impactful, not because it's, very unique technology that we're not seeing, but the reaction on how the kids experience that was very, very overwhelming. So I'll put that on my top list.
Oh, that's great. Cool. How about you, Sven?
Yeah, so when I'm super honest, then it's probably a 3D model that I had created with Hexa. So we're just playing with your guys' technology, right? And it's probably a shoe that I pulled out of the sample data from our SAP upscale commerce solution, and we turned it into a 3D model. But on a more fun side and more entertaining, whatever private side, I still have one of these Google VR headsets. And I believe the last thing that was for me a bit mind-blowing really that I've done with that is like watching the stars, right? So you can just, so it's VR basically, right? You snap in your phone and then you can just, rotate and then look at the stars. And that was pretty cool, actually. Yeah. So what about you, Arika?
Really nice. Yeah, so I had to think about it a little while, non-work related, but actually a good friend of ours opened a VR bar about a year ago, actually. That's not too far from us. And my fiance and I, we went to the opening night and got to play some pretty cool games and have a really nice experience. So I'm looking forward to going back there when they open again, because it's a bar, cafe, hangout, and they have some really cool games that you can play arcade style. And I'd never been to a place like that before, so it was pretty neat.
Very cool. Awesome. Then I would say we're again super over time, like always. We're sorry for your next meetings. Thank you so much. It was great talking to you. Let's chat again soon. And thank you so much for spending the time with us, okay? Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Bye.